This is Danny Sullivan on Cars and Culture with Jason Stein.
Well, Danny, what an awesome experience to share the microphone with you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Enjoying everything. Looking forward to Indianapolis. Everything Hall of Fame, and haven't been back for a while, like a lot of folks, because of the pandemic and other reasons. And looking forward to very exciting 500.
Yeah. So when was the last time that you were at the track? Would that be 3 years ago?
I think it was actually 4 to 5 years ago, and, I was gonna go last year, but they had a limited amount of seats and, passes for everybody, so I thought maybe I should, bow out and let somebody else do it, and I just didn't wanna get involved in massive crowds and all that. I just thought wasn't fair to everybody else or any, in that kind of scene, so I bowed out.
What will it
Uh,
mean for you to go back this time?
Well, I think first of all, it'll be the first time since RP bought the Speedway, and of course, owns the series, and I'm excited to see the changes, um, and so forth. But also, it's such a great race. It always is a nail biter, always thrilling, and a lot of new faces there, and a lot of old faces. So it'd be good to catch up with everybody, and I'm very excited about going back.
Is there a moment when you go back to the track that you take a minute to reflect on everything that occurred for you there? I imagine the flood of memories has got to be real.
I think the memories it just brings back, and it's more than just like the spin or the win and all that. It's just the time that we spent there. Now, I didn't do it as many years as some of the other drivers have done it, and don't go back as regular as they do. But I was still there, 12 years, and of course it was more the month of May. It was a longer stint than they have right now. So there's a lot of experience. Indianapolis in itself, not just the speedway, has changed substantially. The
Yeah.
downtown, everything, the growth there, and I think that when you see all that stuff, it's not quite the way it was before. Look at just Speedway. Just look at the main street right there in Speedway, how much that's developed. And it used to be pretty funky back in the day, and it's great to see the growth. And I think under RP and what's going to happen and the excitement of the competitiveness of the IndyCar series, I think you're going to see it grow even more.
About a year ago, we had Roger on the show right after the last running of the 500 and talked about what that meant to him. And he talked about the emotion connected to it all and the fact that now finally, of course, with COVID being what it was and how it affected the race 2 years ago, it was so important for him to bring some normalcy back to the track. I want to ask you about the captain. Why is he as successful as he has been? You raced for him.
Um, he has on a banner that used to be up on the back of some of the tracks when he had Nazareth, which I was a partner with, but Michigan, all that. It says effort equals results.
Mm.
And Roger lives by that, and he looks under every stone for every detail. His attention to all that stuff is second to none. And what we all forget was that Roger, in his day, before he started really his business empire, he was one of the best sports car drivers in the world.
That's
And
right.
very creative with it. Remember, was it the Xerox Oldsmobile or something back in the day? But as a driver, he was great and very competitive, and he never lost that edge. And I think when you work for Roger, you realize that he's pushing the envelope as hard as anybody in the garage, and and that's infectious, and it pushes you to do better and so forth. And so I think that's why he has a success. Plus, for him, the 500 is the race, bar none. You know, he wants to win the Indianapolis 500. You could championships are great and other races are great, but Indy 500 for him is the pinnacle,
Yeah.
as it is for most of us. But I think that's why he drives so hard to do that. And can you imagine what the emotions he must have had that year back in the 90s when neither car with two-time champions didn't qualify? I mean,
After all that effort. Yeah.
for all that effort. And But I think that just drives him more. That just makes him more competitive and doesn't want, learns from his mistakes, analyzes everything. Okay, why'd we have a failure? Not, not, he's not stomping up and down, yelling, screaming, doing any of that. It's okay, why did we fail? Let's find out the reason. Let's make sure that doesn't happen again. And that's the guy you want as your boss
Almost an engineer's mind to some extent.
to some extent. Although engineer slash racer, because
Right.
ultimately, sometimes engineers just want to keep it engineering everything. At some point, Roger says, "Hey, we're going racing," there was a very good lesson back in the day. Remember when we had the Ilmore engine, and I remember talking to Carl Kienhofer that built the engines for Roger for forever, and he said, "We work at getting the most power that we can, but the most reliability." Okay, they'd rather give up a little bit of horsepower to have the reliability, because if your engine fails, you're done. And so that he was always more about making the thing as competitive as possible, but finishing races and making it reliable. And I think that's a big factor for his success.
When you earned a seat in his car as a pilot of one of his cars, it had to be just an enormously gratifying experience.
You know what? When I first joined, I didn't realize how big a deal it was because I hadn't been in IndyCar for very long. I'd only really done 3 races one year, and then really did the year with Doug Shearson and the Domino's Pizza, and then signed with Roger. And so, um, and I'd raced so much overseas that I knew the legend, obviously, and the reputation and his success. But remember, in those days, he hadn't won a championship for a while, since Rick had won it. It had been 4 or 5 years. So, overall, it had gotten competitive. But once you get in there and you realize the attention to detail and how hard he's focused and how driven he is and how that creates with everybody else. That's why if you look at the people that work for him too, most of them were there for a long period of time. Look, Rick's still there.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, but how many of the people that worked for him that wanted to get out of the racing, that went into other parts of the business, other jobs in the organization? And I think that just goes to show Roger looks after his people, and that's one thing. He's very loyal to most of his people.
So the son of a successful contractor from Louisville, Kentucky, ends up driving a race car for Roger Penske.
Yeah.
I mean, Danny Sullivan.
Who would have thought, right?
Who would have thought? And I mean, you were a troublemaker growing up in Louisville,
Yeah,
right? Or so I've read.
I was not the best for my parents. I didn't get in trouble much with the law. I wasn't that kind of, but I, had a wild streak and stuff like that. And then of course, Vietnam War, dropped out, went to New York. And that's where a friend, a mentor, Frank Faulkner, came into the picture, because I'd grown up around all his books, auto course, automobile years, all his pictures on the wall, everything, even though he was an academic pediatrician. There's also another connection. He was very close with Leon Mandel.
Okay, who is
Okay.
the father of the executive producer of the show, Dutch Mandel.
Right. And that's how I met Leon, was through Frank, because Leon was also very close friends with Peter Revson back in the day, and so forth. And so when he sent me to Europe to the driving school, and they said, okay, you've got talent, and I could pursue it. Frank called in a lot of friends for advice and so forth. But anyway, and that's how, believe it or not, it got to Roger, because I had a successful season with Doug Shearson, and we were nitpicking over some stuff in the contract, and Roger called Frank Faulkner and said, does Danny have a contract for next year? Frank says, I don't know, let me check. And I said, no, because we weren't there. And Roger, as always, called and said, can we meet? And that's how it started.
And fate shook your hand. Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's get back to Dr. Frank Faulkner, a family friend. He found you in New York. You were driving, but it wasn't race cars. You're driving yellow cabs, right?
Well, when he found me, I'd actually stopped the yellow cab stuff, and I was working as a waiter. But yes, I drove for a while because
You were a
the
taxi driver. You were
and
Robert
the
De Niro.
well, yeah, no, I did it for a short bit. But when you went there, and I, decided I wanted to spend some time there, there was two jobs that you could get, and that was a taxi driver, and it was awful dangerous in those days, and a waiter. And so I worked them both for a while, and then realized I was meeting more people as a waiter than I was going to do driving people 20 blocks or 10 blocks. So anyway, it was all fun. It's all
Oh,
part of New York.
well,
Yeah.
some wouldn't know that not only were you a waiter, a cab driver, you're also a janitor. You were a hand on a chicken farm. You were a
Yeah.
lumberjack,
Yeah.
and you're a race car driver. So take me to Mr. Faulkner sending you to the Jim Russell driving school in England for your 21st birthday.
Yeah.
Did you look at him and go, "Why are we doing this?"
Well,
Or did you say, "Okay, I really want to do this"?
well, so at the time you couldn't race without parents' permission until you were 21 years old. And I wasn't quite 21 years old. I was 20 at the time. And on the advice of Sir Jackie Stewart, he said to Dr. Frank, he said, let's find out if the lad has any talent and let's send him to Jim, meaning Jim Russell. Because remember, it was all pretty small then. It wasn't quite as big, corporate and all that. And so for my 21st birthday, Frank sent me to the Jim Russell School at Snetterton in England, with the caveat that if Jim said I had talent, then I could pursue a career, but otherwise I had to return to university. And uh, and I got to tell you, when I sat down in the car the first time, and you're going to drive faster to the grocery store around in 95 than we were allowed to drive when you start off, which with good reason. And and I thought, this is everything I've ever wanted to do in life, right here.
Wow.
It was
Wow.
so it was
It
so
hit you then.
little Formula Fords. We're going 60 miles an hour, 70 miles around the corner or something like that. Pretty mundane in the whole scheme of things. But at the end of the deal, Jim said, and I believe he told everybody this, that I was one of the more talented guys to come out of school. And and I do believe he probably said that to keep people coming back to do more races, but it was good for me. It was good for me. So it was, but that was the easy part. Now you're an American living in Europe or trying to live in Europe. No money. There's no, and I'm working as a waiter. Frank was a academic pediatrician. I mean, there's just no way. So through his connections, people like Augie Pass, Bill Kimberly from Kimberly Clark, all these guys that he knew back in his days, ACUS, SCCA, and so forth, they all chipped in, small amount of money compared to what it is now. I lived in a boarding house opposite Brands Hatch, and that's how it all got started. And on weekends, I worked as a gopher for Ken Tyrrell, Jackie Stewart, and
Mm.
Francois Severo were the pilots there. So I got a lot of education from Sir Jackie on a lot through osmosis, but just watching him, what he was doing and how he was with public and silly things like signature and make it so people can read it, don't have a hen scratch type of thing,
Mm.
and all the things. Because if you really think about it, Jackie was the first really true professional racer
Yeah.
in terms of, I mean,
Global
Goodyear,
superstar.
Ford, Rolex. He's still with half the brands. I mean, he had that global presence, and he
Right.
was the first guy. So, and unfortunately, or fortunately, it was at a time when that's when the sponsorship era really was having to start because of cost. So anyway,
You
that's what
slept in the
happened.
back of vans, you wrenched on cars, and you just tried to focus your energy on competing in Formula Fords and Formula 3 open wheel race cars. But
Right.
you ran out of money and you had to go back to Kentucky.
Yeah.
Did you think it did you think it was over?
Um, I was getting pretty tired of the nose and struggling for sponsorship and not having the money. And look, Frank, as I said, was an academic. I'm working 2 3 jobs. Skip Barber gave me a job to help on some of the schools, so I'd go do those. you know, tending bar, waiting tables, working from construction for my dad some, to just try to get things to, but I didn't want to go back to school and get I don't want to say a proper job, but a job, because I wanted the flexibility that if I got a call, I could go do something. And that was,
And you
and
got a
then
call. And
I
you
got
got
a
a call.
call. Yeah. And
Louisville's own G. Garvin Brown III,
yeah,
right?
yes,
Who, for those who don't know, Brown was the scion of the Brown Forman Distillery family, makers of course, Jack Daniels.
yeah.
All of a
Well, they
sudden, you
got
had
a
somebody
lot.
who was going to support you.
Well, it started off funny and rocky. And at first he said no. And then, we kept bumping into each other, and he'd come back to town. He lived in California. He'd come back to town. We go out to dinner. And finally I said, hey, I got this offer. I'm done. I'm about done. He said, well, come on, we'll go take a look at it. Come out to California. And, I had to get my dad to guarantee my my credit card, the airplane ticket, because he said, no, I'll take care of everything. But, so anyway, and we go out there, and to give credit, um, there was a place, it was at Riverside. We didn't do the deal, but we were in the bar at the hotel where a lot of people stayed, including Mario and Allenser and stuff like that. And I remember we were standing there, and I'd introduced him to Mario and Al Sr., and I left, and I went to go, I think, to use the head or whatever, I'm going to the bathroom and come back. And he said, okay, I'm going to put you on a retainer. And Mario had said, hey, let's help this guy out. If you can, let's go for it. And that's literally how it started. And there was a lot of false steps during that, because, again, I don't have the knowledge, the education of what to do and where to take Garvin. And so there was a few false steps. And again, Leon Mandel came back into the picture and our Can-Am year, and did a book on it. And that helped. And Garvin, and it just, Garvin really saved my career. I mean, for me, he was a Renaissance man, because he stepped in and put his money where his mouth was. And it was all, by the way, it was never through the company. It was all his private money. It was just his inheritance.
So all of a sudden, you're going through the Can-Am series, and then you end up a few years later, you're in IndyCar,
Yeah.
and then you're right back to Europe in the biggest stage in racing. I
Yeah.
mean, how old were you when you started racing Formula One?
I did it in the season was 83. So I was 33 years old. So I was late. I was a late bloomer. But it was just one of those things that the opportunity came. Ken gave a call through Ken Tyrrell, and said, we want to put Danny in a test. And Benetton was driving part of that, because Benetton was trying to go into America in a big way, and they wanted an American presence if they could. So Ken says, well, I know this guy. And there was all kinds of people at the test. There was 10 of us, I think, 9 or 10 of us, Stefan Johansson, Bebby Gabbiani, all kinds of Bruno Giacomelli. All the guys at the time were Formula 2 or successful in Formula 3. And anyway, and turned out to be the most consistent and quickest in the end of through the whole run. So I got invited to a test in Rio, and went down there for that, and had a really good test. And by the way, I only drove the car in I was down there like 8 days. They were tire testing for Goodyear, and I think I ended up doing 5 laps in the car total, because they were tire testing. And obviously it's hard for Ken to go to Goodyear, hey, I want to test this guy, for the deal, for my drive. And it worked out good. But I can't tell you how many times I walked or rode around that track in Rio and
Wow.
stood on every corner watching everybody test, and listening to the gear changes, where they were braking, trying to figure it all out. And worked out.
Pinching
So,
yourself the entire time, I could imagine.
yeah, a lot, and it's, I had grown up, believe it or not, I mean, because of being in Formula Ford, Formula 3, some Formula 2 in Europe, some sports cars. I'd grown up more around European racing than I really had around IndyCar racing. I had a lot more knowledge about it, and knew more people in the sport. So
So it has not been a solitary journey for you. to get to the race car driver profile that you wore for so long, and you had help from people along the way. Why did they believe in you, Danny?
I don't know, just trusting people, and I think they knew my intentions were good. I wasn't trying to, you know, manipulate anybody or something like that. And different people helped. Girlfriend from Kentucky thought it would be good to buy a car for me so that her son could go and watch the races, and things like that. But when she wanted the car sold to get the money back, it was sold like in 6 days and gave it back to her. There wasn't any. I, I don't know. I think I was just straight up about it. I believed, and there was enough. We all get these. I think there's enough um, a good result here or a win here in a Formula Four and a good result here and there, but it was very hard without the consistency and the money and a proper team to have consistent results. But I think enough people had seen the spike, if you like, and said, okay, let's give this guy a shot. So,
Your win at Indy, and we'll talk about the spin because I'm sure it's not the first time that you've talked about it. But your win catapulted. There are some who have said that your win catapulted racing into a whole new direction, but more importantly, the profile of a race car driver into a different direction. So if Jackie Stewart, as you said, was the professional race car driver, the global professional race car driver, you became the Hollywood race car winner of the Indy 500. You were on People magazine, and you were eventually in Miami Vice, and you were the poster guy for a new style of driver. Hollywood, you were nicknamed, right?
well, believe it or not, it goes back to Benetton Formula One,
Okay.
Long Beach Grand Prix. Luciano Benetton asked to meet me in Westwood, where UCLA is, and on a street corner. And it was where all the mailboxes, remember there used to be USA Today, LA Times, New York Times, Wall Street, boxes just lined up. And so I knew Luciano quite well. His Italian and my English were on par, which to say was pretty minimal. We were okay at a dinner or something like that, just kind of talking broken English and broken Italian. But I got a friend of mine who's now unfortunately gone, who Claude spoke like 6 languages. And we met there because I didn't want to lose anything in the translation. And he said, look, I see your name in the paper. I see Tyrrell's name in the paper. I don't see Benetton's name in the paper. How do we get that done? And Claude translated without even asking. He said, well, in America, you need to have a PR person for Danny. And he said, well, get Danny a good PR person. And he introduced me to a guy named Alan Neerob, who was with Rogers and Cowan, who was really an entertainment firm. They did movies, stars, all that. He had all these people. And he had one athlete, and that was Ozzie Smith, that played shortstop for
the Cardinals.
the Cardinals. And so I met with Alan, and he and I got along great. And Luciano said, okay, do it. So we had so much success that year when I was in Formula One that when I went to IndyCar and with Doug Shearson, I kept it on. And he was really the architect. By the way, he's now the CEO of Rogers and Cowan. Now, I mean, he never, but he was the architect of the whole deal. And he and we were really good friends and so, but he changed the outlook of what was in. He said to me one time, he says, well, what do you want out of all this? And I said, don't laugh. I said, I want to be, I'd like to be on the Wheaties box.
No.
Not because I really wanted to be on the Wheaties box, but but they only put somebody at the top of the sport that was a recognizable on the deal. I was the finalist on the Wheatie box. I got beat out by a guy named Michael Jordan. Go figure. But I mean, but MJ, but I would have voted for MJ. I mean, it was the right call. But you see, but we wanted to get the publicity, and this I learned a lot from Sir Jackie. Outside of the sport, we got Automotive News, Auto Week, Auto Sport, Motoring. You were in that because you were in the top echelon of the sport. If you're going to be viable for a sponsor, you want to have a broader platform and fan following, because if it comes down to it and you're over here with two other drivers, you all look the same, have the same results, you're virtually all the same, what's going to set you apart for that sponsor?
Well, it paved the way for many other race car drivers, effectively to do the same thing. I think of Jeff Gordon, another guest on this show, who was Madison Avenue. He was Boy Wonder. He was
And Jeff and John Bickford said they modeled it after the off-track stuff. They modeled it after what I had done in the deal. David Coulthard said the same thing. They modeled it after that. But for me, it wasn't because I was looking to get my name in lights. It was looking to be a asset for the sponsors. Okay, because it's all driven by the money. It's all driven by the money, right? If we don't have the sponsorship, you're not going to get you're not going to get in the team.
It's like the American space program in the 60s. No bucks, no Buck Rogers.
Exactly. What a great quote. A great quote. But it actually, believe it or not, think about it later on in my career with Penske. Okay, it happened to an extent. When we had three cars: Pennzoil, Rick Mears, Emerson, myself. Okay, when Pennzoil was pulling out, well, there was no way Rick was going anywhere from Roger. Okay, and Emerson was part of the tie to Marlboro because of his relationship back when he won the world championship. I mean, which is, get it. So I was the short guy with a stick, if you like, in that. So you had to look at it, but that's even an example of how important a sponsorship game. And even in Formula One to this day, when Santander, the Spanish bank, went to Ferrari, they went because Alonso was going.
That's right.
And there's always been some tie-up sometime where somebody wanted to stay with a certain, team because of that. And a lot of it's the relationship with the driver. So it was a natural, back to Sir Jackie Stewart, Goodyear, Ford, Rolex. I mean, look what he did with Ford later on when he got him to fund the team, bought the team from it. I mean, that was because of that relationship. So,
yeah. Your Indy victory, you spun, you won, and how did your world spin after that?
Still going on, to some extent, because it's still one of those magic moments for me anyway. I'm not saying for everybody, but a magic moment that you still get introduced that way. And I remember one time flying someplace, and I had won Pocono and Michigan and Indy, and I was checking in for an airplane ticket, and the girl goes, "Oh, you won the Indy 500?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "No, it's right here on your profile. It's right here in the profile." It didn't say anything about the two Pocono 500 wins or the Michigan.
It didn't, did it?
And so I think it was one of those, just those, badges of things that happened. And it just, I my heart would have liked it not to have spun and just gone on to win it. But now it's a very cool thing.
So today it's available everywhere and easily searchable on YouTube and things of that nature. And I was watching it recently and listening to the commentators at the time talk, the ABC commentators, just amazed at what had occurred. I've never seen that before, they said. Do you ever watch the clip?
Oh, yeah. I've commentated on it probably, oh gosh, thousands of times. Here we're going to play this back, which is fine. It's fine. It's funny because I still get butterflies, when I watch it, going, "Oh, am I going to pull it off this time?" I mean, I know it's silly, but it's just one of those. But there was, thankfully it was Mario. Thankfully we were further around the corner. If it had happened early on in the corner, I wouldn't have had the car a little bit more straight,
Yeah, he ducked out of the way too. He ducked left.
Yeah. And that can easily, I mean, it's hard to miss a car which happened to me later in the race with Tom Sneva and
That's
Howdy
right.
Home, and just missed Tom. And but Mario's about as experienced as you get in pretty cool head. So it all worked out.
Your high speed pirouette sent your world into a whole new direction, and all of a sudden you end up as Danny Tepper on Miami Vice as a race car driver on Miami Vice. What was that like?
You
Talk
know,
about culture.
yeah, no, you know what? Michael Mann, was the producer for that. Michael's produced some fabulous movies and everything. He's a car nut.
No.
And he's a little bit more of a muscle car guy, but he's a big Ferrari guy and so forth. And he asked me to do it. And, remember in those days they had Jim McMahon on and Glenn Fry from the Eagles and
That's
stuff
right.
like that.
That's right.
And so he tried to liven it up and he said, would you do this? And I thought, hell yeah. I mean, how many people are going to get, it was the hottest show going and it's like, why not? And I said, obviously, as long as you don't, as you'll protect me and I don't get embarrassed too much, but it was fun. It was good to work with Don and all the group and I had a blast doing it. So,
Let me ask you some more philosophical questions about racing. Why do some of the world's best road racing drivers come from countries outside of America?
I think it's more, America's probably the only place that really has big time oval racing. Okay, where it's a part of the culture. All those guys that grew up on midgets and sprints and dirt tracks, and super late models and modifieds and so forth. Whereas everybody else's kind of culture from New Zealand, Australia, South America, everything, it's road racing. And so they end up gravitating toward, trying to make it in Formula One and so forth. But that's kind of the platform that everybody gets their experience on. And I think the European experience was really good because of the competitiveness of it. Because England's a little bit like a melting pot. They're from all over the world, all over the world. And when I lived in the boarding house opposite Brands Hatch when I was first starting, there was a guy in there from, I think, Venezuela. There was a guy in there from Wales, an English guy, and there was one other guy from another overseas country. And it was just kind of like, and that was just one example of one boarding house. And I think that's just, it's their background. It's what they grow up with.
Yeah, sure. If you were to assess different cultures and drivers from different countries, how do you think some of America's homegrown drivers would fare in among the pantheon of world best driver?
I think that given the opportunity, there's the top racers that I've run against from American guys are just as good as anybody that I've raced against, and I think the problem is you really have to want to do it to go to Europe, okay? Because they're different cultures, different foods, different ways they live, just hours that stores are open. We're pretty spoiled as a whole in America. Everything's kind of at our fingertips.
It's true. Yeah.
And we have one other thing is that we have a lot of options in America of racing. Why should I go overseas? I can do Indy cars, I do street races, ovals, I do all kinds of things, the Indy 500, NASCAR, I've got this, I've got all these options. Whereas a lot of the countries back, from South America to, New Zealand, Australia, it's basically if they can make it big in Europe, then they've got a shot to get someplace. And I think that's the difference. You got to really want to go to Europe. But in terms of talent, our guys are just as good here as they are anywhere else.
Can you or would you put NASCAR drivers in that category of world best?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a real art to driving a cup car or all the NASCAR vehicles, but classes, I should say, vehicles. But yeah, I mean, guys like Dale Earnhardt that I drove against some and so forth. These guys are very talented. It's just a different platform. It's like saying, would you put somebody like Sebastian Loeb, who's a rally guy, or Ogier or any of these guys in the same category? Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just a different platform.
And Dario Franchitti, who's been on the show, will say that his struggles in the Cup circuit were real. That it is an incredibly challenging vehicle to drive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Multiple Indy 500 winner.
Yeah, and look at Juan Pablo Montoya, who's as tough as they come and has as diverse a background in all kinds of cars, and he won a couple races down there, but he didn't dominate down there. And again, it comes back to a lot of other stuff as well. And one of the most important parts of all that, and I've said this about getting an American into Formula One, it makes a difference if you get them into a competitive team. Okay. And I'm not knocking the teams that they were with, Chip's teams or anything like that. But if you're in a top team, a Hendrick or whatever, or even Penske and Cup racing or any of that stuff, it helps.
Michael Andretti has tried his hands in competing in Formula One as a driver. Do you believe the lessons he learned in that short tenure there will serve him well in today's environment as a team owner?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that Michael, I mean this sincerely. I think if Michael had actually moved to Europe, and that's hard. He's got a family there. They were anchored well in Pennsylvania, everything. I know that's not an easy transition. Okay. But I think that if he had gone there and stayed and embedded himself more in the community, he would have been our third world champion. I mean, because look at the gains that he made from the beginning of the season until the end of the season against arguably one of the best in the sport, Senna, and with one of the more difficult cars at the time to drive, of all time to drive. I mean, it was a very complicated deal, but Michael was right on par with him at the end of the deal. I think he just felt more comfortable back in America, and but I really believe talent-wise, Michael could have been world champion.
Yeah. You follow Formula One actively now?
I'm for a long time now. I've been a Formula One driver steward, so I'm one of the guys that you don't see on the TV, thankfully. But when they put on the bottom that it's under review or whatever, that's a number of us. There's usually only one driver at each race, and I do 4 to 5 Grand Prix a year. I'll do Miami this year, Silverstone, Monza, and Mexico City.
Okay. And your role there is to do what?
There's 4 stewards. There's a chief steward, a second, a driver steward, which had to be somebody that drove in Formula One in the past, and then a local steward. That's sometimes very, very good because they're usually a Formula One steward, but they're from Italy, America. There could be Tim Mayer, could be the steward, et cetera. And we are basically, if there's an infraction, both technical or on the track, we're kind of the judge and jury. I don't mean to sound, but we're trying to make a decision. We try to look after and be fair to everybody in the situation, but we also try to make the decision fast so that if somebody gets a 5 or 10 second penalty, for example, they have a chance to redo their strategy and get back out and win a race. Like Silverstone last year when Lewis got the 10-second penalty for the contact with Verstappen, he served the 10 seconds, but still came back and won the race.
Yes, he did.
Strategy. So you try to make those decisions as fast as possible.
So what was your analysis of the last race of last season?
That's a tough one. I wouldn't have wanted to have been Michael Massey, but remember something, that wasn't the stewards. That decision on the restart was made by the race directors.
That was race director, right?
That Michael Massey, who they've let go. And I think that it was, you don't think about, you try not to think about the points or anything in there, but you can't help with all the hoopla and the buildup. And he's now been doing 22 races. He's, everybody's exhausted. He's traveling like a maniac all over the world, track inspections, this, that, and the other. Everybody's in his face over this, do this, do this, do this. He came under immense pressure, which I think was wrong, where the team principals could radio to him and, oh, what about this? What about that? Don't do this. Don't do that. That's wrong. He needs to make the decision. And I think, unfortunately, when he only waved, if he had waved all the cars by, the race would have ended under yellow. And
Yes.
the teams had all came and said, we'd rather not, we don't want to finish under a yellow. We'd rather have, it would have been kind of anticlimactic, especially that particular
Especially
race.
with what was on the line.
with everything was on the line. So he tried to do it. Okay, I'm going to let these 5 cars go. And so it bunched up. And whether he knew that Max had stopped and changed for tires, and had soft tires on, and Lewis had 41, he may not have even had that all going on, because he's trying to clean up that accident for Latifi and get the workers off the track and everything. I mean, unbelievable pressure,
Wow.
and so you don't,
Great perspective.
and I think it's not unfair to criticize him, but I think it's unfair to unequivocally just say he's wrong and get rid of him. I mean, it's a tough deal, but I think there was enough pressure to, and I can tell you one thing, with the late Charlie Whiting, they wouldn't have been radioing in to talk to Charlie. Okay, Charlie he would have stopped that.
He would have shut it down.
Yeah, those guys, look,
Well,
I've got this. Leave me alone. I know what I'm doing. Remember?
And speaking of Hollywood, I mean, Netflix has certainly put a different spotlight on Formula One, and this has become a little bit of a reality series to some extent. The circuit has, and you go back to the days when you raced it, and and Bernie Ecclestone's control, and the curtain was closed, and nobody saw anything that was going on, and now it's wide open. In fact, it's more than wide open. There are cameras everywhere on everyone.
Yeah, it's I think with social media too, because Bernie kept social media pretty eliminated, or
locked it down. Yeah.
And I think that Liberty's done a fabulous job. Chase Carey and Sean Bratches, those guys came with the idea for Drive to Survive. I mean, that was their baby.
Sean's been a guest on this show. Yeah.
And it's changed, I think, the way there are so many people that were in racing, the families didn't even follow it until Drive to Survive. I mean, I know more people now that drive, I love it. And I think because of that, it brought it into everybody's living room. Now, the pandemic probably helped that, because more people were looking around, but the diehard fans are unbelievable what that did. So that added a pressure. And then the pressure of what we all forget is how much is at stake for those teams and for those drivers. I mean, Max is a world champion. If it had finished the way it was, Max wasn't going to be world champion after having a stellar season. I'm not favoring anybody one way or the other. I'm just saying, but it's now, Lewis only has 7. I mean, big, but but if you think about it, I mean, he lost to Rosberg by 1 point in Abu Dhabi, and then he lost on that. And the part that I think was probably the hardest for Mercedes and for Lewis is they had started off the season not very good. The car wasn't great. They had caught up, and then they had really been dominant toward the end. Not only that, he had been dominant that race. I mean, he was pulling away from those guys on 41 lap tires.
Yes.
So it wasn't like, it got taken away from him that Max had, been dominant. He got, so I think all that just added to the drama.
A few final things. You collect cars. What's your favorite? And you can't give me the child analogy here.
No. It's believe it or not, I sold a lot of my cars and my motorcycles just because when I moved to Florida, there just wasn't many places to drive them. And I also had gotten to the point where, okay, I've done a lot, I've had them for a long time, and I want to try something different. I want to try to, probably one of my favorite of all times. I had a little 59 A Coupe Porsche. Okay. And it was a bit of an outlaw, and I found it in England, but the guy that had bought it originally was a California musician, and Andy Prill had an outlaw engine and it had brake, and this thing was the most fun car to drive. It was just a hoot. But they all have their own personalities and highs and lows. That's why you buy them. I mean, some are, I had a Lancia Aurelia to a Ferrari 330 GTC, Gullwing. They're all, I'm not saying favorite child, but they all have their own personalities.
Where's your Super V powered Volkswagen Scirocco today?
Probably in a junkyard, I would imagine, but I have no idea. I gave it to my brother, and then he sold it eventually to somebody, and who knows? Who knows?
Oh,
but great times, great times.
Do you regret not having that vehicle anymore?
There's some of them that I regret that I didn't keep back in the day. I mean, I had a Porsche 73 RS lightweight, and I sold it. And listen, I made great money. I can't complain, but I sold it so I could get a Tut Hill rally car that we rallied in Europe, that my wife rallied as well, because I didn't want to rally, a registered RS lightweight. And anyway, they're all, listen, bikes. I had a fabulous Lawwell. You know who Mert Lawwell is?
No, I don't.
On any Sunday, okay, he was who Steve McQueen emulated. Mert did 19 flat track championships in America and won 17 of them.
Wow.
For Harley Davidson.
Wow.
I use that. The reason I bring it up, I use all the time when they're talking about Lewis's and Schumacher's 7 championships. I go, you ever heard of this guy? And he raced against Kenny Roberts, Freddie Spence, all those guys. I mean, he beat them all. So anyway.
When you walk into the grounds at Indianapolis for the first time now in 4 years, is there a favorite place that you want to sit? Is there a glimpse that you want to have, a view, a purview that's a favorite of yours?
I think the biggest thrill is walking out of Gasoline Alley into the pit lane for me, especially on race day, because it might be the same on carb day. This year, I don't know what the crowd will be like, but when you walk out there race day, it's just the arena, if you like, just the atmosphere, the collage of colors that you can't even see. It just, the whole hoopla.
Yeah.
There's nothing quite like that. Nothing quite like that.
Danny Sullivan, thank you for sharing your thoughts on cars and culture. Thanks for being part of our culture.
Thank you very much, Jason. I appreciate it and your time.
The automobile is one of the most important inventions that revolutionized the modern world. In America, the rich history of car culture runs deep as technology continues to shape the future of the industry. Jason Stein,
former publisher of Automotive News,
is here to share the stories of people passionate about cars, from industry leaders and innovators to car-obsessed celebrities. Buckle up as Jason takes you inside the boardroom, onto the track, and around the bend on Cars and Culture on SiriusXM Business Radio.